Welcome to the ClusterSeven webinar on the spreadsheet management lifecycle. Within this webinar, we will be discussing the ubiquitous nature of spreadsheets, the spreadsheet lifecycle itself, and how technology can be used to manage the cycle. I'm delighted to introduce Ian Cleaver, our webinar speaker today. Ian brings a wealth of experience to the session, having worked in the financial services industry for over 20 years at organisations including HSBC and RBC, and over the last 5 years working at ClusterSeven as VP of Product and Professional Services. ClusterSeven has been around for over 12 years, recognised as the industry leader in strategic spreadsheet and end-user computing software. With offices in London, New York and Boston, over a third of the world's top 30 banks, as well as leading insurers, investment managers and energy firms are clients. I will now hand over to Ian, who's going to deliver the webinar on the spreadsheet management lifecycle.
Thank you, Laura. So we all know the world runs on spreadsheets. Excel has been around for 32 years and is a very, very flexible application. It's used by more than 1.2 billion people worldwide. It's quite interesting. The flexibility of spreadsheets is apparent, and when you start looking at how they are being used within organisations and how they develop from a simple standalone file into what can only be described as a full-blown application supporting business processes, you obviously need to start thinking about how issues can be addressed. So we all know spreadsheets can solve problems, but I guess they can literally solve any problem. A spreadsheet can be very simple, but the information contained in the file can have significant materiality, which potentially increases risk within the business, around operational reporting, financial reporting, regulatory reporting, for example. When they go wrong, they can have a significant impact. For example, several cases of spreadsheet errors over the past few years have added fuel to this topic and increased pressure for organisational action. Researchers have discovered a major math error in 2010, in this case study by Harvard economists on the sustainability of debt. They actually found that there was differences in various different publications that had been quoted by experts, which potentially was just completely incorrect. JP Morgan, they lost $6 billion, allegedly down to copying and pasting incorrect information between their spreadsheets. And Barclays, due to lack of transparency in their spreadsheet, had data that was being hidden instead of it being deleted, which resulted in unnecessary losses. And more recently, Marks and Spencer's, double counting in a spreadsheet leading to their misstatement of their sales numbers. So with £38 billion represented in spreadsheet calculations and 16% of large companies admitting to finding inaccurate information, maybe it's time we start to look how we can improve the management of spreadsheets and their life cycle. However, before we do that, let's consider the value of spreadsheets. So looking at limitations of existing corporate systems, they probably do not provide the required functionality, i.e. there's a gap between what the system can do and what the user needs. Sometimes users can be unaware that functionality exists in a complex system due to lack of training, for example. Gaps between corporate systems and user requirements are inevitable. As business processes change, system development struggles to keep up. How long can users wait for a business problem to be addressed? Faced with these challenges, real or anticipated, it's not surprising that business users look for other ways to achieve their goals. In looking to their own resources rather than enterprise systems, they need to be available, capable with technology, and they have a familiarity within the tool set, and it has to be within their budget as well. For most business users, these constraints limit the option available to them as just literally one application, and that's Excel, our favourite tool. The creation of new software will take time. It costs money and diverts staff resources to develop. A senior budget holder can't afford to throw money away at every concept, nor chop and change development priorities as new and proven ideas emerge and decay. By building the idea into a spreadsheet, it's possible to continuously develop and improve it, creating a solution that fits the business need. However, there's going to be some costs associated with this approach as well. So we've got some direct costs, we've got risks that are being introduced, not having formal processes, Spreadsheets are obviously error prone, so we could have a lot of errors that are introduced in calculations. Training issues, key man dependency. So, for example, we could have one person who's developed a particular spreadsheet. He's the only person who knows how it works. When he leaves the organization, you're left with an application or a spreadsheet, which is fairly complex, which effectively we don't know how it works in the organization. There's also indirect costs and costs associated in meeting regulatory requirements. As the regulations get more stricter, then effectively the costs go up because people have got to put more process around their spreadsheets to make sure that they can achieve what's required from the regulation. And we've seen changes in the regulation recently as well. So, for example, BCBS 239, Solvency II, stress testing, etc. These regulations now are all focusing on how spreadsheets are used within the financial services. New regulations are also coming into effect. For example, GDPR. IT systems will come under scrutiny, but how many organisations will consider the data that exists in their spreadsheets? Given that millions of Excel workbooks, each workbook having multiple sheets with millions of cells in a sort of a typical workbook in a typical organisation, the task of ensuring that these mammoth files comply with various GDPR regulations and requirements, including right to be forgotten, data portability, personal information, will be very difficult without the use of some form of technology. So thinking about spreadsheet lifecycle and why we've got spreadsheets in the first place, in an ideal world, data is going to flow from an IT managed data source, whether it be a core system, whether it be a repository of information. We want that information to flow smoothly into a financial system or an IT system. And when the information comes out the end of that system, it's either delivered as an output into another system or it's delivered as a report. Maybe it's a board report. In reality, spreadsheets start to appear around an organisation and they basically start to fill these gaps in system functionality. More spreadsheets are added and more gaps are filled. We then start to look at some of these spreadsheets becoming critical in the process. So these are the red ones in the diagram. We can start to categorise these spreadsheets and we can start to see some types of the spreadsheet, or the types of spreadsheets that are being used in the organisation. So for example, we've got spreadsheets that are used for integration and extraction of data, which is the top left-hand corner. Moving down the slide to sort of the bottom left, we've got preparation and aggregation. So maybe we've acquired a business, their systems aren't fully aligned, and we're now aggregating that data of two systems together before we put it into an accounting platform. We've got supplementary models. So the financial system isn't capable of doing complex pricing models. So we effectively take the data out, we make some adjustments and manipulation to that data, and then we pass it back into the financial system. And then everyone's favourite, final mile reporting. You get a nice report from IT, it's great, but it's just not quite right. Just need to make those final little adjustments, just need to change that graph a little bit so it looks a bit more prettier. And the best tool for using that is obviously Excel, but we've got errors that can effectively be introduced at that point. And then my favourite set of spreadsheets are spreadsheets that are created and used to reconcile data that are contained in the spreadsheets. So almost fulfilling its own prophecy of spreadsheets managing spreadsheets effectively. So thinking about development, we've seen how the population of spreadsheets can increase. We then need to think about any additional elements of that spreadsheet lifecycle we can start to address, and also consider how these files are developing over time. So in theory, we should treat the spreadsheet as an application. So we analyse the requirements, we consider other solutions like developing IT systems. We then consider the design of the spreadsheet. There's a lot of information around best practice in designing spreadsheets available. It doesn't have to be too complex. It can be a simple set of basic rules that you're adhering to give you some consistency around how those spreadsheets are developed. Then there's some coding, some testing hopefully is done, and then finally it's released to the users for maybe capturing that data, part of the business process, and then there's documentation if those spreadsheets change. So it almost goes back through the cycle before it's re-released. Very, very similar to normal application development. What happens in practice is we get a basic idea, which effectively is me doing some analysis around requirements to introduce a new pricing model. I'll use a spreadsheet, I'll start putting data in it, I'll add formulas, and that's kind of my design then, because I'm not really following any sort of fixed standards or fixed way of putting that information into that spreadsheet. It becomes my creation, it becomes unique to me and the way I learn how to use Excel. I change the spreadsheet, I develop it, that's my coding. I'll add new ideas to the spreadsheet. We go back to analysis, or are we supposed to have done some testing at this point? And while all this is happening, I'm actually using the spreadsheet in the business to make my decisions. And I haven't done any kind of testing at all at this point. So we're left with, when we find an error or when something goes wrong or the data doesn't look quite right, we then look around for someone to blame. So is it the person who developed the software? Was it where the data came from? Was it the core system? And there's a lot of firefighting exercises that then go around trying to work out why that important decision was made, potentially on bad spreadsheet data. So why bother testing? Well, if we don't test when moving spreadsheets through a life cycle, then the testing is done by other people in the organisation. It leads to a significant amount of wasted time. So on average, people spend 43% of their time validating information on spreadsheets. And if it's a management person, then it's closer to 47%. Because Excel's been around so long, we've all accepted the fact that spreadsheets are used within the business, they can contain errors, and organisations have introduced manual processes to help them address some of these issues. But they find out fairly quickly that the processes introduced to check spreadsheets, to review spreadsheets, to understand how they're changing, actually increases the processing time or the time it takes to effectively do that review. And it's very difficult to scale that, especially as more and more spreadsheets are introduced into the organisation. So let's think about what we can do about that. So we're going to have a look now at managing the spreadsheet life cycle. So from a ClusterSeven perspective, we offer a number of, I guess, pillars of capability. So we like to call our capabilities around discovery, inventory, monitoring, comparison. So starting at the top left-hand side, we have a discovery process which allows you as an organisation to go and scan the inventory, search for files, and it's actually quite a scary process. You will actually find millions and millions of spreadsheets in your organisation. We can do some optimization around that, so we can apply some filters, we can start to reduce the amount of information that's pulled through on that particular scan. We can also add what we call a sort of a deeper scan, where we look actually inside the file, and we can start to see its complexity. So we can start to look at rules, apply some information around maybe your best practice standards. So for example, in macro coding, anyone who uses on error resume next probably doesn't really understand how to code macros correctly or doesn't understand VBA. So this is a sort of a shortcut where I can ignore any errors that occur and just skip over them. So from a best practice perspective, that's not too good. So we've got some rules that are out the box. We can go and look at that complexity. We can do that analysis. What we can also do is we can also start to look at data lineage and technical complexity scoring. So one of the things, if we just jump onto the next slide here, we can see in that discovery process, we can start to build up that picture or build up that data lineage tree. And this is a real example from an insurance company. They start with a single Excel file feeding the capital model. We've done a risk check on that file. So from a complexity perspective, it's gone red, so it's high complexity. We've also seen it's got some slopey shoulders, and the slopey shoulders effectively tell me that there's macro code in that particular file as well. Now with it feeding the capital model, if you ask the actuary to say where else does the data come from, he'll probably be able to answer that question at sort of the level 1 of the spreadsheet links and the data source links. Because he can find that out in Excel. He can open up Excel, he can look at the links, and he can work out where that data comes from. What he might be not aware of is the next level down. So the spreadsheets that are owned potentially by other people that are being provided to the actuarial to do his modelling process, we might find that they've also got links. And then as we start to drill through that and we start to understand where that data lineage comes from, we start to see the bigger picture. So now we're seeing data as it sits across the organisation. And various different hotspots become very apparent. So if we look towards the centre of the diagram, you can see there's a red spreadsheet which has got quite a lot of links in. that particular file there is the financial business plan, for example. So it's the business plan owned by finance, and all of the data that they use to collect that business plan, their forecasts, their budgets, their modelling, actually sits in one spreadsheet and then is provided up to the actuarial to feed his overall process. So using these kind of diagrams, we're able to determine some of the data lineage within the organisation. We're able to expose where spreadsheets are used, and also start to look at how those spreadsheets can effectively start to impact on business processes. Going back to our capabilities, the next one then is inventory. So once you've identified or discovered all of those files, what you then want to start to do is effectively do some triage. We need to look at, well, for all those files, what business area are they in? What processes do they support? Criticality assessments. So not just on the technicality or the complexity of the file, but what's the materiality of the file as well? For example, we could have a very, very simple spreadsheet, which is single worksheet, page of numbers, which goes off to the regulator, and that is actually very, very material because it states all of the assets in the organisation, or it's the balance sheet, for example. Hardly any calculations involved. Could have a very highly complex spreadsheet that has no materiality in the business. For example, somebody's fantasy football league. So the inventory effectively allows us to start to build up that list of spreadsheets or collect that metadata. And from that, we're able to then start to look at where we've got similar spreadsheets in the organisation. We can start to look at how many spreadsheets are in certain business areas. That then gives us, based on our criticality and complexity assessment, the ability to identify which ones are our really critical files. And these are the files that we probably want to spend a lot of time on. These are the ones that we want to monitor. We want to see if we've got any changes occurring to these spreadsheets. So what we've done here is we've then gone from millions of files to thousands of files. We've built our inventory. So now we've got a small selection of critical files, which we can then move into our monitoring and comparison capability. The idea behind that is we're able to monitor those spreadsheets in place. User doesn't have to move them or change them in any way. We're completely non-invasive to the user's Excel world. We'll monitor those files, and as they change, we can effectively pick up all of that information. We store it away in the ClusterSeven suite, and then we have various interfaces that the user can interact with to view how that file's changed. They can also provide commentary. So when we talked earlier about the software development lifecycle, if I do make a change, it might be useful to record what that change was. Why did you change that macro? Why did you change the way the certain formulas were calculated in your spreadsheet? You can then record all that content or all that commentary against each of the versions of the file that we're monitoring. So when audit come in or when the regulator comes in and wants you to demonstrate how those files have changed, you can effectively replay that information back to them to show that you have an effective process for managing your spreadsheets in the organisation. We also get some operational efficiencies. There's an alerting capability of your software. So consider a situation where you have a spreadsheet that's being fed by a particular data source. Maybe that data source doesn't send information on a Monday, for example. So your spreadsheet now has Monday's data in it. You're using it on Tuesday, and you may not have realized that no data refresh was done. So you now have a lot of stale data. Wouldn't it be great that as soon as you save that file, you then effectively get a notification telling you that all of that data on that first sheet hasn't changed, it's stale? Or maybe someone fat fingers a number. So maybe you've got a situation where a couple of numbers are changed, or there's a cut and paste error, and all of a sudden all your values move by 50%. So how about an alert which comes out to tell you that a number of key performance indicators or a number of key metrics within your spreadsheet, key files, key pricing information, has actually moved outside of certain tolerances? So these are the operational efficiencies or the operational alerts that we can give out to the business users so they can understand not only how their spreadsheets are changing, but also gain some value in understanding how their data is changing as well. So moving a little bit on to the benefits now. Hopefully you've seen today we can help deliver some benefits within spreadsheet lifecycle process. For example, data lineage, understanding how spreadsheets are used to move data around the organisation, using best practice when designing spreadsheets, and getting visibility into how spreadsheets are changing through the development lifecycle, from development through testing into production. And then being able to capture, document throughout the whole lifecycle of the file those changes that are occurring in the actual file itself. The benefits of managing spreadsheets. We have also looked at how technology can help replace manual processes associated with checking those spreadsheets, and this allows organisations to continue to use and maintain the agility enabled by spreadsheets, but with reduced risk and meeting your regulatory compliance requirements. Also improving the quality of data in the business process and the overall knowledge of where and how spreadsheets are being used across the organisation. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. I hope you've enjoyed it and I hope it's been useful and informative. Thank you very much and goodbye.